Hey everyone, it's time to Nefis and chill. In this video, let's talk about the class system in the upcoming MMORPG Ashes of Creation. While the classes system doesn't seem entirely too fleshed out or finalized just yet, the concepts and planning of the system seem quite astronomical at first glance. It's definitely overwhelming to look at, say, this chart of the class system, but still a bit exciting to see what kind of diverse and fun results may come out of this system. Just to clarify though, at least from the former game lead designer for Ashes, Jeffrey Bard, players shouldn't think of this system as 64 different classes, but more like 8 classes with 64 different variants or flavors, and that each variant won't be too outstandingly distinct from one another within their own class spectrum. And as I've covered in my previous videos going over both the races and religion systems for Ashes of Creation, the combat balance is centered around group play more so than it is based on an individual or vacuum environment like some other MMORPGs. I get the sense as we learn more and more about Ashes of Creation, the game philosophy when it comes to combat balancing is to let everyone go ham and be OP with a definitive rock paper scissors style system on an individual scale, but putting more focus on group compositions and group gameplay, which I think is great. I think this kind of philosophy is more bearable, or at least more enjoyable, when games like ESO attempt to sterilize and homogenize their classes for the sake of balancing from a spreadsheet to try to make everyone happy and achieve some sort of play whatever you want, but it's basically all the same kind of environment. To understand the proposed Ashes of Creation class system, you'll need to know that on this chart, your primary class or archetype will be Fighter, Tank, Rogue, Ranger, Mage, Summoner, Cleric, or Bard, totaling up to 8 archetypes. As you progress through the game and get to a certain level, right now it's determined to be level 25, you can unlock your second archetype or secondary archetype, which is the top chart column that's basically the same list of Fighter, Tank, Rogue, Ranger, Mage, Summoner, Cleric, or Bard, that when combined with your primary archetype, produces your class as a whole. So for example, if your primary archetype is a Rogue, and you choose a Summoner as your secondary archetype, then you become a Shadow Lord. A Tank primary archetype combined with Cleric would be a Paladin, and if you want to double down on your Bard identity, you become a Minstrel. This is quite an interesting system, and immediately we're left wondering how it works as a finished product. Apparently, while the primary architect cannot be changed once you've made your character, and yes, there is an alternate character system in Ashes, much like in ESO and other MMOs, you can still change your secondary archetype. Your secondary archetype is mostly there to augment your primary archetype skill line, so if you're primary fighter and become a spell sword by choosing the mage as your secondary archetype, your fighter's skill rush as a physical gap closer will become a blink or teleport closer to your target. Fortunately, we also got to see from Alpha 1 testing and Alpha 1 discussions on how primary skills work. In this chart, for example, we got to see the Tank, Cleric, and Mage archetype skills, and these skills look pretty freaking awesome. I just love how on point in terms of theme each primary archetype skill actually correlates to the names such as Hollowed Ground for Clerics, Black Hole for Mages, and Ultimate Defense for Tanks. You can also see from this chart how that secondary archetype idea determines what kind of augmentation or modifier it gives to your primary archetype, from the previously given example of the Spell Sword's Rush turning into a Blink Rush. Classes will, like races, not be gender locked, thankfully, like some MMOs. Also, in addition to being complemented by racial stats and so on, players will have access to weapon skill trees with different types of weapons, including shields, daggers, and swords, and also passives. Alongside weapon skill trees, there will be universal core combat actions, just like in ESO, available to all players, such as blocking and dodging. And going back to what I said earlier about group play balance, I find it really cool we have an idea of how Intrepid Studios wants to promote class synergies and compositions in group gameplay. For example, it's been confirmed that when 8 players of the same primary archetype are in the same group during a PvP siege battle, they can create what's called a monumental effect or siege ability. If up to 8 summoners got together during a siege, they can create the largest golem type to fight for them. 2 summoners can create a golem as well, but it's just not going to be as big or threatening as 4 summoners or 8 summoners getting together. Creative director Stephane Sheriff have also stated that if 8 tank archetypes combine their summon wall abilities, it can create what I imagine to be like the Great Wall of China to divide your opponent's army. And from a previous development update in 2019, perhaps even a siege weapon like a war beast could be summoned by several ranger or summoner players. In addition to combat play, just like how there will be race-specific quests and stories, there will also be class-specific quests and stories for players to experience, which I think is pretty cool, and adds a lot of immersive quality to an MMO in an area where some other MMOs still seem a bit afraid of touching at times. Lastly, I want to read this previous YouTube comment on the previous Ashes of Creation video I made where the commenter said, well, I hope there's no such thing as like a meta basically. Interestingly, creative director Stephane Sheriff himself seems wary of letting the class and combat balance go too much of an obvious meta or cookie-cutter-esque environment where one class or a specific raid composition will dominate for a patch cycle or something like that, much like in ESO and other games. I think in some ways that desire could be possible on some level if they intend to keep this system as diverse and group-oriented as much as possible. But I think also on another level, it's a bit naive to not expect players to eventually figure out the loopholes and advantages of specific compositions and so forth. I mean, that's my whole shtick in ESO. But my biggest hope for that, honestly, as a response, instead of trying to keep it an even playing field by nerfing everybody or doing some weird spreadsheet balancing where everything feels or is the same across all the classes or variants, that the developers at Intrepid Studios just keep a cool head and keep going with the same philosophy of group balance and letting players loose upon the world of Era. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to keep up with more Ashes of Creation, news, content, or whatever else I'm doing honestly, definitely do subscribe to the YouTube channel or drop on my Twitch streams to say hi. And you can also discuss more Ashes of Creation in the Ashes Academy Discord server. And we're still updating the Ashes Academy website as we go along. And hopefully Alpha 2 will be out in 2023. Stay safe, have fun, and see you guys next time.